The barriers are coming down, the opportunity is increasing. The question is, can you assemble the team? Can you understand the opportunity? Can you take advantage of it?
Right, so to set the scene a little bit, Singapore is home to the second largest number of tech unicorns in Southeast Asia and is considered top of the leaderboard in funding. Leading sectors based on our research so far is consumer products, logistics, software as a service products, and e-commerce. But beyond the statistics, we're looking to get an investor's perspective on the startup and fundraising landscape that exists here, and basically find out what opportunities and challenges exist specifically more for foreign entrepreneurs who are looking to set up shop here. So to start off with, Kuo-Yi, can you give us a bird's eye view of the investment landscape in Singapore? Like, how would you describe the tech ecosystem here?
Yeah, I would say we are kind of like at the tail end of probably the first decade of evolution. I think the ecosystem really started maybe about 8 years ago. And in that span of time, we've seen quite a deepening of the ecosystem in many areas around both obviously, investor community like Rafael and ourselves in the community of various stages and various focus areas and various strategies. Over time as well, Singapore has become more of the hub around for the Southeast Asia market as well. And that really means a concentration of both entrepreneurs, service providers like lawyers, accountants, etc., and bankers to support the ecosystem. And so I would say, over the last 8 to 10 years or so, the ecosystem has really deepened quite significantly in that span of time.
Okay, and Rafael, what actually led to VenturesOne's expansion into Asia as a originally Dutch-based VC? Like, what appeal does this market actually have to investors?
Well, it happened organically for VenturesOne. So we were basically a group of entrepreneurs, and our founders had businesses together in Europe, and the opportunity arose to build one out in Singapore. And shortly after that happening, actually, Tony, who's one of the CEO here, bought a car and went online to buy car insurance and realized there was no direct car insurance in Singapore at the time. And being in the insurance market for 30 years, or about 30 years now at least, realized this was a huge opportunity. And so they went about setting up Direct Asia and addressing that market opportunity.
So essentially in the last decade, that's when people really started to pay attention to the potential within the region. And since then, it's come down to like a concentration in Singapore becoming a hub, as you say. But then how has the investor appetite shifted in Singapore or Asia Pacific more broadly, especially given the current economic climate in light of COVID-19 and so on?
Yeah, I think there's always been significant amount of appetite. I think in 2019, it was a record year in terms of the amount of capital raised by various fund managers to look at investments in the region. And so that remains to be present, that the amount of dry powder remains to be present. Now, obviously with COVID, things slowed down for various reasons, travel restrictions, people becoming more cautious as they look at investments. But the amount of capital and the amount of enthusiasm remains still quite significant. And I would say as well that the number of companies we've seen in terms of entrepreneurs and founders looking to raise funding and start companies and get business going remains to be quite strong. On top of that, we're seeing higher quality, higher conviction founders now believing in what they do, staying the course in spite of COVID. So I think we're coming sort of to the point where there's capital, there's strong will, high conviction founders. I think we're almost in a kind of a perfect storm of sort in a positive way. And once we see, COVID, the end of it, turning the corner, I think we're in a good place.
Totally. I think investing to some degree, even though investors are constantly looking at digitization and technologies and things, it's still quite an analog process, or has been. So, it's been important to be sat together, be able to shake hands over a deal and really get a feel for the other person, because, it's not a fast journey typically. It's a marriage, I call it, because, you need to be able to work together, and it's typically, hopefully, a long and pleasant journey. So, I think the appetite may have changed based on industries. We've seen some industries obviously are massively affected. Others have done very well. So I think you need a kind of post-COVID proposition, certainly. But there's obviously still tons of capital to be deployed here. So it does represent an opportunity for those that can take it.
So then as investors, what would convince you to put some money into a business at this point in time? Like what qualities would they need to have for you to say, yes, this is a go?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really the clarity in terms of the value proposition. And clearly the founders have to kind of deal with two scenarios now. In the short term, to understand why the value proposition will still be relevant and can produce the momentum for them to build a business around, a product around, and get reasonable and valuable feedback from the market. And then preparing themselves for the longer term world where things will come back to some level of normalcy, where the value proposition still needs to make sense, it still needs to be relevant, if not more so. And I think so founders need to have that clarity and the sharpness around how to define their relevance to the market in both situations. So that's probably the added complexity from a founder's perspective, and to be able to explain that and make that compelling to an investor and gain conviction from the investors as well.
All the basics still apply, of course, which are the things that investors are looking for. Typically, number one is team, often because obviously you're placing a bet on people delivering the results. Traction, investors typically want to see you've got some customers, or if you're MVP stage, there's very strong signals that the value proposition is going to resonate with customers, and you're going to have product market fit, because without that it'll be hard to attract more capital. Technology, we like to see some differentiation and really understand what you're building, and then ideally for a VC, you want to see 10x potential, something transformative, something that can really get super big and offer a 10x return for investors. There's another T, which is terms, but you normally get to discuss those when you're kind of already getting close to making a deal. So I think covering those basics is important, but especially important now on the value proposition side, and don't forget your market sizing, because often VCs are looking to understand the market as number one.
So again, understanding the market we're currently in, given all of the, basically how life has changed dramatically in the last 12 months, but also not forgetting that businesses operate according to, or VCs look at businesses according to very specific metrics that they also still have to abide by. So then what sectors are each of you focused on at the minute? Like what technologies are catching your eye?
Yeah, for Monk Ventures, we've always been the first principles kind of investor. We don't look for specific themes. We're also seeing this emergence of what we call the second version of e-commerce in Southeast Asia, which is a lot more social, a lot more multi-channel, a lot less dependent on the large platforms. And that, coupled with the rise and adoption of e-commerce, leads to a fast explosion of these, value that's being driven through these non-traditional, non-platform driven channels. And that to me is exciting, because it presents a whole different set of opportunities. There are dynamics and needs that these sellers would then require to be effective in what they do. So at some level, the second coming of e-commerce. We're also seeing some sectors like healthcare and education clearly getting a lot of airtime, a lot of relevance in this time and place. I mean, one of our portfolio company called Padlet, Padlet, has seen almost a 7-time increase in revenue in 6 months, and we're talking millions of dollars of revenue for a 10-man team. That's pretty phenomenal, right? Now, we like to think that this is not a lightning in the bottle, that is something that's more persistent, which I truly quite believe that we're seeing a fundamental shift in how people behave, learn, live, and work, etc.
I mean, I like to invest in areas, domains where I have a little bit of experience. So we are broad investors, and we look around the team and understand who's the right person to lead a particular investment. But I particularly like fintech. InsurTech, obviously, Tony's got a rich background on the insurance side, and turns out a lot of companies also have a very strong insurance angle, because insurance touches our lives across the board. And Also, I guess what you've seen in Asia with all the explosion of kind of B2C companies, we're quite excited by what's happening now with B2B, B2B2C offerings in particular, SaaS companies, and even things like augmented workforce that we start to understand a bit more about how we can improve the lives of workers who are delivering all these great products and services for us.
So then, shifting from your perspective as investors, what do you think founders need to be aware of before they enter a market like Singapore, Asia Pacific, specifically founders who are coming from, say, a European market? What do they need to know before they, book their flight here?
I think it's always useful to get a sense of the broad sort of trends and behavior depending on what industries you're looking at. Southeast Asia is not just Singapore.
Right.
Once you get to Indonesia, and Indonesia is not just Jakarta either.
Yeah.
And once you get past, the city, the urban kind of landscape, you start encountering a very different world. I see that as opportunity. I see that to be richness in terms of problems to be addressed. And so I think a little bit of research, a little bit of openness in terms of understanding from the ground up and really spending some time talking to people, appreciating the local conditions would be very, very helpful before making that leap.
Yeah, understanding APAC and Southeast Asia is not one market, but many.
It's huge.
I guess if you land in Singapore, awesome place as a hub for raising capital. But whenever I'm looking at a business focused on the Singapore market, perhaps that's a bit more like a UK or an Australia or a New Zealand, rather than, say, Indonesia or Philippines or its neighbours. So I think absolutely, it's about understanding what you're building, how it's gonna really work here. So you've got to know your stuff, or you've got to have connections. So use your connections, use the connectors and the network you have, and start to build a really strong picture of what you're getting yourself into.
So then on that note, are there any best practices you think people absolutely need to have in their back pocket?
I think Rafael hit it right on the head. I think relationship matters a lot. I think that really shows up to be one of the key characteristics of a lot of the things that are working out, because people have built a long-term relationship, over time. And as much as you can think about conversations that happen on paper, through email, nothing beats, seeing people in the flash, 2 hours of dinner really shows up the nuances.
To me, the main thing is to go in with a long-term view. You have to be committed to the long-term, find a home for yourself here, fall in love with the region, and then good things will come.
Last but not least, final words of encouragement to, a budding startup who really wants to grow in Asia?
I think one word that I picked up from Rafael's previous comments is that there's a lot of new things happening here. New internet users, new markets, new behaviors, new trends. And it's always good to be coming into a new situation when people are open to adopting new things. I think that's kind of like why Southeast Asia has always been kind of the attractive focal point for entrepreneurs and ambitious founders from around the world.
Yeah, I think there has never been a better time to be a startup entrepreneur in history, bar none. You can get access to customers more affordably, more easily than you've ever been able to. And you can access a whole global talent pool of freelancers, which are all digitizing now because the lifestyle has changed thanks to COVID. You don't even need an office anymore because everything's digital. So the barriers are coming down, the opportunity is increasing. The question is, can you assemble the team? Can you understand the opportunity? Can you take advantage of it? And can you bring partners along who are sharing that vision? And then I think you can really build something amazing here.
I agree.